Welcome back to another new episode of the Morph Your Mind podcast. I am your host, Justin Wright. My co-host, Chrissy Barron, will be joining us in a little while. And before we get started, as always, I would like to thank our title sponsor, Nova 3 Labs. Now, I will tell you that personally, I consumed more of their protein and carb supplement this past weekend than I would rightfully like to admit. And if you use the discount code podcast15, that's podcast15 at NOVA, the number 3 labs.com, you can order some for yourself. It's fantastic. It kept me going this past weekend when I was competing. I'll tell you a little bit more about that momentarily, but they have sleep supplements. They have natural anti-inflammatories. They have supplements for focus, for adrenal fatigue, you name it. Put it in order, use that discount code, save yourself some cash. And so, as I mentioned, I had the honor and privilege of competing this past weekend down in Washington, D.C. at the Mid-Atlantic CrossFit Challenge. And I was brought out of retirement, some may say forcibly, to compete with 3 very good friends of mine. And we had an absolute blast. We had a great weekend. I learned a lot about myself as an athlete, which is always funny when you've been doing this for a while. But we were pushed, to our limits. The workouts were very difficult, very challenging. They were very well designed. And what inevitably happens in any competition is that there are certain things that happen that are outside of your control. So you go in with a game plan, or you go in with what you want to happen, and ultimately that plan tends to crumble. There's the famous Mike Tyson quote, which I'm sure you've all heard, that everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And I think that, competition or physical environments like that are a very good way to illustrate that point. And so this entire episode is going to be focused on remaining calm during times of chaos, and in particular, how do we respond when things are out of our control or when things happen to us that kind of go against our game plan or our initial game plan. And so there are really a couple sides to this, and the first side that I want to talk about is the physiological effects of nervousness or agitation, which tend to happen or tend to follow some type of competitive environment, or tend to follow when things start to derail. And we know that familiar feeling, the butterflies in the pit of our stomach, maybe a cold sweat starting to break out, elevated heart rate, increased rate of breathing, respiratory action. All of these things tend to be associated with nerves, and they tend to show themselves during times of chaos or right before we know that we're entering into a situation where the plans could fail, where things could go poorly. This is very common when we're getting ready to step out onto the competition floor, when you get those pre-competition nerves. But this is just as likely to occur when you're prepping for a major presentation in a boardroom, or whether you're trying to close a big deal as a salesperson. So all of these scenarios put us into that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response, where that heart rate quickens, where we get those butterflies, we get that knot in the pit of our stomach. And that feeling, I want you to understand, can be positive or negative depending on our perception of that. So before we actually get into how to control the chaos or how to organize things when everything goes wrong, let's start with our mindset going into an event that makes us nervous, or in an event that is difficult for us or we know is going to challenge us. So when you feel that sympathetic response, when you feel those physiological effects, what I want you to do is understand that whether you are nervous or whether you are excited, the nervous system responds the same way. So that sympathetic nervous system turns on, switches on, anytime we're in that fight or flight mode. Now, whether you're excited for what's about to happen or whether you're fearful of what's about to happen, your body physiologically is going to respond in the exact same way. So understand that if you shift your mindset or you shift your perspective and create a positive out of that situation, if you tell yourself that you're excited for what's about to happen, that you're ready for what's about to happen, then your mindset will shift and your approach will change. So physically, the signs are the same, your body's reacting the same way, but your likelihood of success going into that chaotic situation increases when you flip that switch in your brain and you tell yourself that you're excited instead of being nervous. And so if you want to read more about this or understand this concept a little bit more, I just put out a new blog post on this exact topic on my website, trainedright.com. You can go to trainedright.com/blog. check out that new post if you want to read a little bit more about that. And so that's the first step of understanding chaos, or the first step of dealing with a situation where there are factors that are likely going to be out of our control, things that are likely going to punch us in the face, as Mike Tyson says, and that are going to force us to change our plans. And so now I want to dive into how exactly we do this. So how do we change our approach, or how do we flip that switch in our mind to be thankful for the opportunities we're given instead of to be nervous about those things we can't control? Because a lot of times, if we look at fear or we look at anxiety, and we've talked a lot about anxiety in the past on a previous episode, but if we look at anxiety, oftentimes it's caused by fear of things that we can't control in the first place. So we start to worry about the what ifs. What if this happens? What if this situation happens? What if that thing goes wrong? And when we're thinking about those what ifs, when we're thinking about all of those possible scenarios, it takes our mind off of the present, and we end up being in a distracted state as we start to ponder all of these possible scenarios and possible outcomes. And a lot of times that is the root of anxiety for many people. It's the root of performance anxiety. So as athletes, people who have trouble focusing and getting the job done, having trouble getting into that flow state, those are typically the people who have anxiety about the possible outcomes. And they're not focusing enough on the task at hand or what they're actually doing. And so if we get in those situations, what I want you to understand is that you need to be able to sort out what you can control and what you can't control. And so when we're talking about, in my situation, being out on the competition floor, I see this happen quite a bit, this phenomenon happen where you have a judge and they're oftentimes going to no rep you, meaning they're going to say that the work you're doing does not meet the standard, and they're going to call that rep a fault. They're going to make you repeat that rep. And there are really two ways to handle this. And it always surprises me when people do the second option. But option one is you accept it and you redo the rep and you try to correct course. So whatever you did wrong, you try to make sure that you focus intently on performing that next rep to the best of your ability. Now, there's a second option, and a lot of people choose this, and it almost makes me laugh a little bit because it's kind of pointless, but some people will just argue with the judge. And now, not only are you not getting credit for the work that you did, but now you're wasting time not doing work for a longer period of time because you're trying to argue with somebody whose opinion is definitive. Meaning if that judge takes a rep away from you or calls that a no rep, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't get that back. And you're certainly not going to appeal that process in the middle of the workout. And this carries through to any sport. When people argue with the referees, the call is what it is. In a lot of sports, you can challenge that call, or the coach can challenge that call. But as soon as you start to argue with that call, as soon as you start to argue with that referee, you're now removing yourself from a situation that you can control, and you're starting to debate things that you have no power over. As a player, if you argue with the referee or argue with your judge, you're just going to make that situation worse. You're not going to reverse that call. You're not going to change that situation. So now, instead of focusing on the factors that are in your control, you're now still focusing on something that you have no ability to change. And this is an important thing for people to understand, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a business person in a big meeting, whatever it is that you are going into, whatever event it is that you're preparing for. If you can't control the outcome of something, then you need to not waste energy on it. And what you need to do is focus on the moment, the present moment, and focus on what variables you still have the ability to change. So if you're in that situation, to use that example of, let's call it sports in general. Let's say a referee calls a foul of some description or some kind. Instead of arguing about that foul, focus on not making that same mistake again, right? If you're a cornerback covering a receiver in football and you get called for pass interference because you didn't turn around and look for the ball, well, then on the next big play, on that next pass coverage, that you need to change course. You need to make those corrections. And what you'll notice about the best players in the game in any sport is they're able to accept the mistake, they're able to analyze how to fix that mistake, and then they're able to drive forward and correct course. They don't allow those factors that are out of their control to get in their head and influence them in a negative way. And if you keep dwelling on the what ifs, if you keep dwelling on the past, and this is, if we zoom out just to a bigger picture idea, we cannot control what has already happened. We cannot change what has already happened, but we can focus on learning the lessons from those mistakes or those errors and correcting course for the future. So if we talk about in a bigger overall sense, being able to remain calm during chaos is less about the actual event. It's less about, a sporting event. It's less about the specific meeting or the specific sale. What it's more about is being able to zoom out, to step back and understand that we cannot go back and fix what has already happened, what has already occurred. We cannot change the past, but we do have the ability and the power to take that knowledge moving forward and change the future. And so if you understand that, then that can help you reduce your anxiety during those moments of stress, because you understand that once a mistake is made, once something negative happens, we no longer have the power to alter that thing. All that we can do is control our actions moving forward and try to alter the course of the rest of that event. So if we go back to this weekend, our team made a tremendous amount of mistakes in a number of ways. We didn't get as much time to practice together as we wanted to, especially on particular implements that were involved in that competition. But instead of dwelling on that, or instead of dwelling on the mistakes that we made during the event, all we could do and all we were able to do to fix that is just communicate during the event, correct the mistakes that we made moving forward, and make sure that we were all on the same page for how we were going to tackle the rest of that workout, the rest of that event. You cannot dwell on the past. You cannot dwell on the mistakes that you made, because what people do is they get into these loops of beating themselves up, and it increases that anxiety and makes that situation worse. What you need to do is say, yeah, you know what? I made a mistake, or we collectively made that mistake. We did that thing wrong. We got punched in the face. This is not going according to plan. This is not going the way we wanted it to go. But as soon as that cart starts rolling downhill, you no longer have control over it. You can't control all those variables. So focus on the variables that you do have control over. Focus on how you're going to act moving forward, on how you're going to adjust. Because in summation, success on a grander scale is more about adapting to change and more about being adaptable than it is about having the perfect plan in the beginning. It's the reason that in entrepreneurship, they tell you to drive forward, to make mistakes and correct course, because having the perfect plan doesn't matter, since 99.9% of the time, that plan's not going to play out the way it was written down anyways. So understand that in general, you need to remain calm by focusing on what you're going to do, what you're going to change, instead of focusing on the past, instead of dwelling on previous mistakes. Don't beat yourself up for what you've already done, but instead learn, correct course, and focus on what you're going to do moving forward in the future.